Sydney's short-term rental market is now generating almost $80,000 per listing per year. 12,500 entire homes are operating as permanent Airbnbs, while the city's rental vacancy rate sits at 1.1%. Landlords are earning record returns. Renters are submitting 30, 40 applications and getting nowhere. The question no one in government will answer: where are these people supposed to live? If your money is tied to Sydney property, you need to see this first. Here's what nobody is telling you about Sydney's rental crisis. It is not just a supply problem. It is not just a demand problem. It is a conversion problem, and it is accelerating faster than any policy response can keep up with. This video covers 3 things. First, the Airbnb conversion machine. How entire homes are being extracted from the long-term rental market at the fastest rate ever recorded in this city. Second, the vacancy death spiral. What a 1.1% vacancy rate actually does to real people trying to rent a place to live. And third, the government that wrote the report and did nothing. Why New South Wales acknowledged short-term rentals as a supply problem in 2024. Welcome to Sydney Housing Collapse. Canvassed solutions, and as of 2026 has introduced no mandatory mechanism whatsoever. But before we get into any of that, here is the number that anchors this entire story. According to AirROI data from March 2026, 83.5% of all Airbnb listings in Sydney are entire homes, not a spare bedroom, not a granny flat. Entire properties permanently removed from the pool of housing that renters can access. Let that number settle for a moment. According to AirROI, of the 12,517 active Airbnb listings in Sydney as of March 2026, more than 10,400 are entire homes. These are not people renting out a spare room while they travel for a week. These are properties that have been deliberately, permanently converted from long-term housing into short-term accommodation businesses. And the economics explain exactly why. AirROI data shows the average Sydney Airbnb listing generates $79,865 in annual revenue. The average nightly rate is $335. Average occupancy sits at 66%. That means a landlord does not even need to fill the property every night to earn what most Sydney households take home in a year before tax. Now compare that to the long-term rental market. According to CoreLogic and domain data from April 2026, the median weekly rent for a house in Sydney is $850. For a unit, $650. That is roughly $33,800 a year for a unit rented long-term, or $79,865 for the same unit listed on Airbnb. The gap is not subtle. It is not marginal. It is nearly 2.5 times the income for the same property. Jason lives in Bondi. He owns a 2-bedroom apartment. Until 2024, he rented it long-term at $650 a week. Then he switched to Airbnb. At 66% occupancy, he now earns $1,100 a week. His own words: "The numbers made the decision for me. I felt bad about it for about 5 minutes." And here is the thing about Jason: he is not unusual. He is not greedy. He is rational. The system made one option nearly 2.5 times more profitable than the other, and he did what any rational person would do. The problem is not Jason. The problem is that 12,500 property owners in Sydney made the same rational decision and nobody stopped them. So what happens to the people on the other side of that equation? Section 1, the Airbnb conversion machine. According to AirROI, Sydney's Airbnb supply grew 70.3% year-on-year. That is the fastest single-year expansion on record. And it happened while rental vacancies simultaneously tightened. Think about what that means. The city did not build 70% more homes. It did not suddenly gain 70% more spare rooms. What happened is that thousands of existing homes people used to live in, were converted into short-stay accommodation. The stock did not grow. It moved. It moved from a market where people live to a market where people visit. Now, the short-term rental industry would tell you this is a free market at work. Property owners have the right to maximize returns. Tourism supports jobs. Visitors spend money in local businesses. And all of that is true. None of it is wrong. But here is the data that dismantles it. SQM Research, April 2026. Sydney's rental vacancy rate sits at 1.1%. Any market below 2% is classified as a landlord's market, meaning there are so few properties available that landlords can charge almost whatever they want and tenants have no leverage. Sydney has been below 2% for over 3 years straight. 1.1% vacancy in a city of 5 million people means there are functionally no options. It means that for every rental listing that goes live, dozens of qualified applicants are competing for it. It means landlords are not choosing tenants, they are sorting through stacks of desperate offers and picking the one willing to pay the most, offer the most rent in advance, and ask the fewest questions. It is not a market. It is a queue, and the people at the back of that queue are not there because they are unqualified. They are there because there is nowhere else to stand. Sarah lives in Newtown. Over the past 4 months, she submitted 37 rental applications. She offered 3 months' rent up front. She was rejected 29 times. The property she lost, the final bid on the one she thought she had relisted on Airbnb within 2 weeks. $320 a night. The home she could not rent to live in is now available for tourists to book for a weekend. That is not a market failure in the abstract. That is a specific home, in a specific suburb, removed from a specific person who needed it. Section 2. The vacancy death spiral. When vacancy drops below 2%, something structural changes. Rents stop being set by the quality of the property and start being set by the desperation of the tenant. According to CoreLogic, April 2026, Sydney rents rose 5.9% annually. The median weekly rent for a house is now $850. For units, $650. That is not a one-off spike. That is a sustained, compounding increase in the cost of having somewhere to sleep at night. Marcus and Priya live in Surrey Hills. Both work full-time. Their combined income is $170,000, well above the Sydney median. They have pre-approval for a mortgage, and yet they spend 42% of their take-home pay on rent while trying to save for a deposit. Their words: "Every time we get close to a deposit target, the goalposts move. We are not losing ground slowly. We are losing it every single month." And they are right. According to CoreLogic, the Sydney median dwelling value is now $1,292,157. Demographia's 2025 International Housing Affordability Report puts that at 9.7 times median household income. Anything above 5.1 times is classified as severely unaffordable. Sydney is nearly double the crisis threshold. Marcus and Priya earn more than most. They have done everything the system told them to do: study, work, save, get pre-approval. And they are still losing ground every single month because every month they save, the price moves further away and the rent takes a bigger bite out of what they manage to put aside. Now, the standard counter-argument here is that rents are set by supply and demand, and the solution is to build more housing. And that is correct. More supply would ease pressure. Nobody serious disputes that. But here is the problem. According to the NHSAC, May 2025, Australia is tracking 77,000 homes behind the 1.2 million housing accord target. Construction completions are falling, while population in New South Wales alone grows by over 100,000 people per year. The supply pipeline is not keeping up. It is falling further behind. And while we wait for homes that are not being built, over 10,000 existing homes in Sydney have been converted into Airbnbs. We are not just failing to build fast enough. We are actively losing the homes we already have. Section 3. The government that wrote the report and did nothing. In February 2024, the New South Wales Government released a discussion paper. In that paper, the government explicitly acknowledged vacant housing and short-term rentals as a supply-side issue. The paper canvassed financial incentives to return Airbnb properties to long-term use. It explored regulatory options. It invited submissions. That was over 2 years ago. As of 2026, no mandatory mechanism has been introduced. Not a cap on short-term rental nights. Not a registration scheme with enforcement teeth. Not a vacancy levy. Not a conversion tax. Nothing mandatory. Nothing binding. Nothing that changes the fundamental equation that makes Airbnb nearly 2.5 times more profitable than renting to a human being who needs a home. The industry would say regulation is complex. That tourism revenue matters. That heavy-handed caps would hurt mum and dad hosts who rent a spare room for extra income. And those concerns are legitimate for the 16.5% of listings that actually are spare rooms. But 83.5% of Sydney's Airbnb market is entire homes. This is not a story about someone renting out their granny flat while they visit family. This is a story about a parallel accommodation industry operating at industrial scale inside a residential housing market that is already in crisis, and a government that identified the problem, wrote it down, and walked away. Meanwhile, the NSW Parliamentary Research Service estimated in July 2025 that between 15,000 and 43,185 dwellings across the state are sitting vacant, long-term. In the City of Sydney local government area alone, the ABS found 3,568 dwellings showing no sign of recent use, 3.1% of all dwellings in the LGA. So the homes exist. They are not rubble. They are not condemned. They are standing there, empty, or earning tourist dollars, while people like Sarah submit their 37th rental application and get told no for the 29th time. The homes are not missing, they are withheld. So, is Sydney an outlier, or is this happening everywhere? Both. It depends on what you compare. Start with Melbourne. According to SQM research, Melbourne's rental vacancy sits at 1.4%, better than Sydney's 1.1%, but still well below the 2% crisis threshold. Both cities are in a landlord's market. Both cities saw record Airbnb growth in the same period. The difference is one of degree, not kind. Melbourne is drowning in 4 feet of water. Sydney is drowning in 6. Now, look at New Zealand. According to verified reporting from 2025, New Zealand's national rental vacancy rose to 4.5% after a sustained period of actually building enough homes. The result: rents declined 3.2% year-on-year, the sharpest fall in 30 years. The comparison is almost too clean. New Zealand built homes and vacancy rose and rents fell. Sydney did not build enough homes, converted thousands of existing ones into Airbnbs, and vacancy compressed to 1.1%. Vacancy compressed and rents rose 5.9%. This is not a mystery. It is not complicated. It is arithmetic. When you remove homes from a market that already has almost none, the people left competing for what remains pay more, and the people who own the homes earn more. That is exactly what is happening. The data says so in plain language. You do not need a PhD in economics to read it. But Sydney's situation carries something the international comparisons do not. Sydney sits at 9.7 times median income for dwelling prices. Vancouver is severe. Auckland was severe before its correction. London is severe. But none of them are running a 1.1% vacancy rate, while simultaneously converting 10,000 homes into tourist accommodation at the fastest growth rate on record. Sydney is not just part of a global pattern. Sydney is the sharpest edge of it. Where does this go from here? 3 scenarios. None of them are comfortable. Best case. The New South Wales Government introduces a mandatory registration scheme for short-term rentals, caps the number of nights a property can be listed without a long-term tenancy, and introduces financial incentives strong enough to make long-term rental competitive with Airbnb returns. Even in this scenario, the conversion takes years to reverse. Vacancy might rise to 1.5, maybe 1.8%. Rents stabilize, but do not fall. First home buyers still face a market at 9.7 times income. Progress. not relief. Worst case, no regulation is introduced. Airbnb supply continues to grow at or near 70% per year. Vacancy drops below 1%, a level that has never been sustained in a major Australian city. Rents accelerate past 6, 7, 8% annual growth. The rental market becomes functionally inaccessible for anyone earning below the median income. Construction continues to fall behind the Accord target. The gap between property owners and everyone else widens into something that looks less like inequality and more like a permanent structural division. Realistic case. This is the one most likely, and the one worth carrying with you. The government introduces a registration scheme but without meaningful caps or enforcement resources. The scheme captures data but does not change behavior. Airbnb growth slows from 70% to 30 or 40%, still rapid, still extracting homes, just not at emergency pace. Vacancy stays between 1 and 1.4%. Rents continue to rise at 4 to 6% annually. First homebuyers like Marcus and Priya keep saving, keep watching the goalposts move, and keep asking how much longer. The system does not collapse. It does not correct. It just continues slowly, steadily, grinding. This is market analysis only, not financial advice. Always speak to a qualified professional before making any property decisions. So, what do you actually do with this? If you are a current mortgage holder, understand that the Airbnb boom is inflating the perceived value of your property, but it is doing so on a base of regulatory uncertainty. If caps are introduced, short-term rental yields will compress, and properties priced on those yields will correct. Know your exposure. Know what your property is worth as a long-term rental, not just as a potential Airbnb. If you are a first home buyer, the deposit goalposts will keep moving while vacancy stays below 2%. The data in this video tells you that the savings timeline is lengthening, not shortening. Focus on what you can control. Your savings rate, your target suburbs, and your understanding of where supply is actually being built versus where it is being converted. If you are a renter, document everything. Know your rights under the current tenancy framework. A 1.1% vacancy rate means you have almost no leverage in negotiation, so your protection comes from knowing the rules, not from market conditions. If you are an investor, the 70% year-on-year Airbnb growth is not a stable trend. It is a regulatory vacuum being filled by capital. When regulation arrives, and it will, the properties most exposed are entire home conversions in high tourism inner city areas. Price your risk accordingly. Here is what the data told us today. 83.5% of Sydney's Airbnb listings are entire homes over 10,000 properties removed from the rental market. The average Airbnb in Sydney earns nearly $80,000 a year, almost 2.5 times what the same property would earn rented long-term. And the vacancy rate sits at 1.1%, a level that has turned renting in Sydney from a market into a queue. The homes are not missing. They are not unbuilt. They are standing there, earning $335 a night, while people who need them submit their 30th application and wait. Sydney did not run out of housing. It chose who gets to use it. Subscribe to Sydney Housing Collapse new analysis every week. No agents, no spin, just the data.